Is this thing on moving forward within our sort of development of ethics? We have to sort of frame ethics in terms of um, basically what ethics means. Now, um, sort of this whole series is more focused on Christian ethics, but ethics as a whole in a branch of philosophy is fundamentally what is right and what is wrong. Um, it's establishing moral positions, and in terms of sort of there's competing thoughts on um, how we can frame what is right and wrong, how we can determine what is right and wrong, and um, in within philosophy, there's sort of three main sort of ethical frameworks. Now, this is sort of the cognitivist approach to ethics. To get into that is basically what you're saying is, can you assess truth value from moral statements? Can you determine if a moral statement is true? The cognitive approach says yes. The non-cognitive approach says no. Moral statements are just emotional statements. So, since we're in the field of ethics, we're gonna go with the cognitivist approach, which is yes, you can determine truth from ethical statements, moral statements, and there are sort of three competing ways to determine that. Christian ethics definitely more for the most part falls under deontology. Deontology basically argues that there is a universal good, there is a universal truth, and the universal good often is tied to some form of deity or um, some form of God. Basically, is the universal good, an omnibenevolent being in the universe that represents what good is, and then going astray from that concept of an omnibenevolent being is sort of the opposite, and it's the wrong. Now, not all deontology perspectives are necessarily religious. For example, Kant was definitely a deontologist in terms of ethics, Immanuel Kant, and he didn't always argue from a religious perspective. But most deontological positions are based in religion, and then they use theological principles as their logic base for the most part in terms of what is right and what is wrong. There's other forms of determining what is right and wrong that is not necessarily saying there's a universal right and wrong. The sort of, for the longest time, the competing ethical branch was utilitarianism. And what utilitarianism sort of suggests is whatever produces the maximum amount of satisfaction with minimal pain is the right decision. It's a more mathematical approach to what is right and what is wrong. And there are problems with it as well that aren't necessarily tied to religious perspectives or anything like that. Common sort of arguments around utilitarianism is sort of the trolley dilemma. there's a train approaching. On one track, one person is stuck. On another track, three people are stuck. Is the right thing to do to allow the train to run over the one person instead of the three people? Utilitarians will say it's the right thing to do. There's other problems. For example, let's say someone goes to a doctor with a common cold, and the idea is, in a purely utilitarian sense, you can euthanize that person to help people who need organ transplants, and that'll help more people. But the thing is that he's going to the doctor to deal with something that he's more than likely expected to survive. And so the idea of euthanizing someone with an illness that is unlikely to take their life, is that right or wrong? So you got deontology, which argues for a universal good and true and right, and basically utilitarianism, which argues for whatever is the maximum good. So it's arguing particularly more of a mathematical approach. And then sort of the third stream of ethics is virtue ethics, which is more tied to identity in terms of doing what's right has to do with how we perceive ourselves to be. And doing what's right, often there are certain traits that people can exhibit in order to be good, to be right, to be fundamentally righteous. There are things like courage, generosity, reciprocity, things like that. So where virtue ethics sort of strays a bit from both deontology and utilitarianism is that they're arguing for a more individual-centric approach and not necessarily sort of a form of cross-cultural ethic that is as sort of religiosity in the deontology branch, and then sort of a collective mathematical good in the utilitarian branch of ethics. And so, what is right and wrong? Basically, at the end of the day, it depends on which of these sort of fields that you subscribe to. More of an individualist perspective of virtues that you must adhere to in order to maintain a good identity, or is it sort of a universal that everyone must do these things in order to be perceived as good? Or is it just whatever increases satisfaction and pleasure and minimizes suffering, minimizes pain? That is the most amount of good. So what is right and wrong? Well, it depends on the ethical branch. Within Christianity, it's more of a deontological, which is a religious belief in a God, and God is the ultimate good, and then you try and sort of live your life to what God, through other people, have told us to do. Now, there's the subfield which suggests that all moral statements are just all moral statements are just emotional statements. The thing is there is a little bit of a logical problem with um, non-cognitive, because what you're saying is that the only way to determine truth value in emotional statements is, or there is no truth value in emotional statements, and then you're also making an argument, an ethical argument, that the only thing that is true is something that can be observed. That's actually an ethical argument and not an argument of um, cognition, not an argument of epistemology. It's an argument of ethics. So, what is right and wrong? It's largely shaped by the ethical fields, and there are sort of strengths and weaknesses from all the approaches. And my personal sort of the way I live my life is typically most pro-social behavior, not always, because sometimes sort of racism, sexism things could be pro-social behavior that is sort of viewed as unethical. But for the most part, social behavior is pro-social behavior is generally ethical, and anti-social behavior is generally unethical. So, antisocial behavior would be behavior that seeks to harm others, behavior that seeks adversarial action from others. That is sort of unethical, as opposed to what is ethical. In my perspective, is generally pro-social, but again, racism, sexism, um, anti-Semitism, other religious bigotries, those can be conceived as social because you're creating a group of which you support, but it's it's unethical. It's not good in terms of behavior to exhibit. Anyways, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one.